New aircraft test flights, including some surprising ones, frustrated airlines and lessors, exciting technologies, and some promising or odd airline and manufacturer news. That, in a nutshell, is what we're going to be looking at today. Yep, it's time for another aviation news roundup, looking at a few of the smaller but crucial stories that we won't cover on their own Mentor Now video, or stories that are still evolving but definitely worth keeping an eye on. And we're going to start with exactly that, a story that barely made the news but could be the beginning of something much bigger. It comes from Europe and China. Many in aviation believe that the Airbus-Boeing duopoly needs an upset of sorts, and China's Comac is a clear candidate for such an upset, and in the past few weeks the Chinese company got a serious boost in its prospects. On the 15th of January, the European Aviation Safety Agency, or EASA, confirmed that it has carried out test flights of the Comac C919. Comac's goal is to have EASA sign off on the certification of the jet, which would make it possible for many airlines around the world to purchase it. But not only that, such a certification would allow current C919 operators to fly their aircraft internationally. Now, to be clear, China's own aviation regulator, the CAAC, has obviously certified the C919 and approved its use back in 2022. But internationally, many countries would prefer to see a regulator like EASA or the FAA give their seal of approval to the aircraft before they allow their own airlines to buy them or allow other airlines to fly them in their airspace. All of this explains why these EASA test flights are pretty important. We don't know exactly when these test flights took place, but according to Chinese sources who first broke the story, EASA sent 2 pilots to Shanghai who took part in an unspecified number of flights. But even before that, Comac trained other senior foreign pilots working in China to fly the C919 to demonstrate its safety and reliability, but getting the plane signed off by EASA isn't a quick process. Back in April 2025, EASA's executive director stated that the agency had been working with Comac on getting the C919 certified in Europe since 2021, and that making this happen could still take 3 to 6 years. But making these test flights was a key part of that process. EASA also has to validate the design of the C919 along with key components, procedures, and everything involved in operating a modern airliner safely. Of course, even if this process is successful, the C919 will still have a few other potential hurdles in securing international sales. For one thing, Comac still haven't been able to increase its production to a level that they'd be happy with. They only delivered 5 aircraft in all of 2025, at a time when Boeing boosted 737 production to 42 per month, and Airbus is studying ways to boost its A320neo monthly rate to the 70s. And beyond even that, there's geopolitics. The C919 still relies on non-Chinese suppliers for the bulk of its components, nearly everything except the airframe itself. In 2025, the US government briefly blocked the sale of CFM LEAP engines to China, since GE in the US makes up 50% of CFM. However, these exports were later allowed to resume. Many in the aviation industry hope to see Brazil's Embraer become the main challenger of the Boeing and Airbus duopoly with the right partnerships or investment. But China and Comac easily beat them on resources, but they probably don't have geopolitics on their side. And we're going to come back to that. Up next, we've got an odd request from airlines and aircraft lessors who are basically asking, can somebody please make some wide-body jets? Now, if you're a regular viewer on the channel, you've probably heard Petra and I talking primarily about the production and deliveries of narrow-body jets like the 737 and the Airbus A320, because these are the bread and butter aircraft of their respective manufacturers. The big wide-body jets are the ones that most airlines feature in their promotional materials, but in reality, it's the narrow bodies that make up the bulk of every airline's fleet, with 1 or 2 exceptions. And that reality is why we primarily focus on narrow-body jet production when we look at the health of Boeing and Airbus and the way both of them have been recovering since the COVID-19 pandemic. And that recovery has been slow, really slow. It wasn't just the pandemic. Supplier problems, engine reliability issues, and of course Boeing's 737 Max problems meant that the production of narrow-body jets has only just returned to the levels they were in 2019, more or less. Boeing is still a bit short of its pre-COVID peak, but according to John Ostrower of the Air Current, Airbus actually broke a production record in 2025 beating its 2019 narrow-body production by 10 aircraft, 700 versus 690. Again, this was a slow recovery, but at least there is some progress to report, especially now that Boeing is finally getting its house in order and increasing production of the Boeing 737 Max. But as I'm sure you've guessed by now, that recovery picture looks really different when we switch our focus to the wide-bodies. Deliveries of these jets aren't back at 2019 levels, not even close. In fact, they're about half of that amount. This information comes from Avolon, one of the world's biggest aircraft leasing companies, who cited data from Cirium. And more worryingly, based on what they've seen, Avolon doesn't expect that situation to change before the 2030s. So why is that? Well, as I'm sure many of you can remember, there have been plenty of production disruptions involving widebodies over the past few years. The Boeing 787's production, for example, was stopped more than once because of assembly and quality issues. And the Rolls-Royce engines of the Airbus A330 and 350 and the Boeing 787s faced some longevity and time on wing issues that actually predated the pandemic. And beyond these problems, the delays in certification of Boeing's 777X mean that airlines need to continue using older aircraft rather than retiring them or selling them on. And all of this is happening at a time when we see a shift towards larger aircraft thanks to rising demand for premium travel with business seats that take up more space in the cabin. Alternatively, airliners packing more passengers into bigger jets to take full advantage of the limited number of gates they have access to in the congested airport hubs. The result? Well, the older aircraft are less efficient, resulting in increasing fuel costs for the airlines, and that, plus the lack of available seats, means that ticket prices can only go one way: up. Supply and demand. Now, there is some good news here, which is that Boeing and Airbus are responding. Boeing's 777X finally looks set to get certified later this year, and Boeing is also working on building a second assembly line for the 787 in its North Charleston, South Carolina plant. Elsewhere, Rolls-Royce are making good progress with its longevity issues, and Airbus is slowly increasing production of its widebodies. Bigger jets are more complicated though, and it looks like both manufacturers can now shift some of their resources towards them. But again, that ramp up could still take another half a decade to bear fruit.
Thank you, Ben. But let me just cut in here with a little twist. Boeing just reported a 57% jump in their quarterly sales, with their CEO saying that there is a lot to be positive about. Orders are recovering despite fleet shortages and rising ticket prices, but this rebound can look very different depending on where you read about it. And that's why we use today's sponsor, Ground News, an app and a website that gathers reporting from thousands of outlets and therefore shows the same story from multiple different angles, including bias, factuality, and ownership. As you can see, more than 80 sources reported on Boeing's sales jump, but the coverage really varies. Right-leaning outlets like the Irish Independent framed it as Boeing reports 57% bump in sales as CEO hails progress, highlighting optimism. Whilst left-leaning outlets like the Spokesman Review emphasized Boeing's recovery continues with more MAX deliveries, hinting at ongoing production challenges. With the Vantage plan, you also get tools like My News Bias, which shows you your own habits and helps you find more balanced reading coverage. And that's to stop you from ending up in some type of an echo chamber. Ground News gives far more insight than any single article, and since you guys have made it very clear how frustrating, sensational and out of context coverage can be, I really recommend checking them out. So, for a clearer picture, visit ground.news/mentor, scan this QR code or use the link here below for 40% off an unlimited subscription. That's just $5 per month for a limited time, and remember, Ground News is subscriber funded, so by subscribing you are both supporting this channel and helping to bring transparency to the information that we all consume. Thank you, Ground News. Now back to Ben.
Our next story is about the progress made in the certification of Boeing's aircraft and some questions that people have been directing towards the FAA. During a speech in Washington, FAA Administrator Brian Bedford said that his agency is not slowing down the certification of the two remaining Boeing 737 MAX variants, the MAX 7 and the MAX 10. And this news came just days after some much needed progress on these certifications. According to the Air Current, the FAA cleared Boeing to start flight testing of the 737 MAX 10 under Phase 2 of its Type Inspection Authorization, or TIA. On the 21st of January, the FAA administrator explained that the agency had added a lot of resources into the process to help Boeing along. However, he then clarified that the FAA can only help get them there, but they've got to do the work, and they are doing the work. This certification is becoming more and more vital for Boeing. As I said earlier, narrow bodies are the big money makers for both Boeing and Airbus. And at the moment, Airbus's biggest seller of them all is the A321neo. The 737 MAX 10 doesn't quite match the seating capacity or the range of the A321neo, but it will be the closest thing that Boeing can offer to it, and the airliners definitely want it. Boeing have an estimated 1,200 orders for the MAX 10, and that number could jump even higher once the plane enters service. Earlier in January, Alaska Airlines placed its biggest single aircraft order ever for 105 737 MAX 10s and 5 787s. The order also includes options for 35 more MAX 10s if needed. Boeing have repeatedly said that the certification timeline is up to the FAA's approval, but they are making preparations to make sure that when they do get certified, they're going to be able to start making MAX 10s fast. And the manufacturer won't be building MAX 10s at the same factory in Renton where 737s have been getting built for over half a century now. Instead, they're going to build it in their Everett factory in space previously used to build the 787. But according to Scott Hamilton in Liam News, Boeing are planning to activate this line even before production of the MAX 10 gets going. They'll first use the new line to build the already certified MAX 8 and MAX 9s as a way to get everything up to speed quickly. Activating that line isn't simple though. For example, Boeing will need to move 737 wings made in Renton over to the Everett site further north. And proving this completely new process is one of the many problems that they hope to take care of by starting production there early. They've already begun advertising jobs for the site, and Liam News also reports that already back in June 2025, Boeing transported a couple of damaged 737 MAX 8 fuselages to Everett for testing purposes. Of course, Boeing will need the FAA's approval to activate the new line at Everett, and it's only been a few months since the FAA allowed Boeing to boost monthly production of the 737 from 38 to 42 aircraft, so this is going to be a big step when it finally comes. It's safe to say that the MAX 10 is Boeing's biggest priority right now. But before they can certify it and the MAX 7, Boeing will need to get FAA approval for the engine anti-ice issue that we've discussed before here on the channel. Next up, we're going to see how several low-cost airlines around the world made the news, but for very different reasons. In the United States, ultra-low-cost carriers have been struggling to reinvent themselves in many markets because of overcapacity, or more generally because several legacy carriers in the country have managed to offer competing low-cost products. We've already seen the problems that Spirit Airlines is facing. The airline has now entered Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings twice in less than a year. And the latest in that story is that after discussions with Frontier for a possible acquisition fell through, the airline is in discussions with investment firm Castlelake. Elsewhere in the United States, another ultra-low-cost acquisition is going through. Allegiant Air is buying Sun Country Airlines in a deal worth around $1.5 billion. And the deal also includes $400 million of Sun Country's debt. The two companies don't compete directly on many routes, which should make the deal a little bit easier for regulators to approve. In terms of fleets, Sun Country flies 737NGs, whereas Allegiant is in the middle of transitioning from old Airbus A320s to brand new Boeing 737 Maxes. In total, the combined fleet of the new airline, which will still be called Allegiant, will be around 195 jets, and they're going to be headquartered in Las Vegas, which is Allegiant's current home. Meanwhile though, over in Europe, another low-cost airline made the news, not because of any financial trouble, but thanks to a bit of a trolling war. Elon Musk and Ryanair CEO Michael O'Leary had a bit of an online tussle regarding the cost and the merit of installing Starlink Wi-Fi antennas on the airline's Boeing 737 fleet. The problems initially started when the Ryanair CEO ruled out installing such antennas around the middle of January, stating that the system increases fuel costs because of its weight and aerodynamic drag. Now that got a little bit of a negative reaction from Elon Musk, who questioned the way O'Leary was calculating the fuel impact of the Starlink antennas. From there, things escalated quickly, and let's just say they got out of hand after the word idiot was thrown around a few times. So, what does all this mean? Well, it's true that the Starlink's antenna is considerably smaller than the satellite antennas that other Wi-Fi systems use today, which is why several airliners are making the switch. But there are reasons why low-cost airlines like Ryanair might be reluctant to fit Starlink to their aircraft. For one thing, the low-fare model means that potentially fewer passengers would be interested in a paid-for Wi-Fi service, especially when you consider that a big chunk of the flights have flight times of just an hour and a half or so. Secondly, it costs around $300,000 per aircraft to install the Starlink system. And when you factor in that Ryanair has over 600 aircraft, the total installation cost would be close to $200 million, not to mention the lost revenue during the downtime needed to fit the system. And even if Starlink's claims of just 0.3% increase in fuel burn are true, with an annual fuel cost of $5.14 billion, that 0.3% is still a significant $18 million in added fuel costs per year on top of the installation and running costs that the company would unlikely make back. Our next story is about a NASA project that would definitely fall under the worth keeping an eye on category. Now, NASA has a number of active aircraft aerodynamic projects, including its quiet supersonic testbed known as the Lockheed X-59, which flew for the first time a few months ago. By contrast though, the plane we're going to look at here may seem a little bit underwhelming, visually at least. It's a NASA F-15B with an odd-looking fin bolted to the bottom of the fuselage. And that fin is actually shaped to model the aerofoil of an airliner's swept wing, and it's there to test laminar flow. Basically, it's designed to explore ways to keep air flying over the wing as smooth as possible. Now, this is a complicated topic that probably deserves its own video, but in simple terms, the wings of an airliner need to be swept to enable the kind of transonic speeds that airliners fly at. But the sweep of the wings creates something called span-wise flow, which flows out towards the wingtips. And this lateral flow can disrupt the smooth airflow over the wing, which ultimately increases drag. There are ways around this involving mechanical systems that add complexity and weight. But if we could find a way to keep this airflow smooth, NASA thinks this could reduce fuel burn by as much as 10%, which really is quite incredible. And to put this into perspective, the all-composite, state-of-the-art Boeing 787 only has an efficiency advantage of around 3% over the all-aluminium Airbus A330neo when they're both fitted with basically the same Rolls-Royce Trent engines. So a 10% fuel saving without a leap in engine tech is simply astonishing. But how would it work? Well, that odd-looking aerofoil under NASA's F-15B has an interesting feature. It can change its profile. Yep, this shape-shifting wing adjusts its profile, limiting the effects of the span-wise flow to keep the airflow laminar over a larger portion of the wing. Now, ideas like this aren't exactly new, but we don't often see large-scale tests of designs like these performed on actual aircraft, and that's what NASA's test is all about. Again, this is a big topic with plenty of odd-looking aircraft used to explore laminar flow over the years. For example, something as simple as a bit of dirt or even just rain can stop the flow from being laminar, but NASA will test that too. But let us know in the comments if you'd like us to explore this topic more in its own video. And finally, here's a topic that broke just as we were shooting this video, which conveniently takes us back to the Boeing and Airbus duopoly that I spoke at right at the beginning. We saw what China's Comac is trying to do, and like I said, Brazil's Embraer is another prospective disruptor. And the latest news is that Embraer is coming back to the picture with a new ally and partner, India, and more specifically, a company called Adani Defence and Aerospace. And the key part of the story is that Embraer and its partners will build a final assembly line as part of a regional transport aircraft program. Now, India's government has been backing efforts to boost domestic manufacturing at all levels, along with programs like new and expanded airports to boost air transport, as we covered in a previous video. And getting Airbus or Boeing to commit to a new final assembly line for an airliner in India was a long-term goal, and now it seems that Embraer takes the nod. Now, the initial information we have from this partnership doesn't confirm that the new assembly line in India will be for the Embraer E2, but it's really difficult to imagine that it could involve anything else. But what if Embraer launches something completely new, something to rival the 737 or A320? Well, the reason why Embraer was reluctant to launch such an ambitious project was because they needed funding from a partner with deep pockets. Now, the deal that was just announced didn't really include any financial information, which is kind of interesting in itself. But even so, could India be the partner that Embraer needs? And how quickly could such a project really bear fruit? Now again, this is a breaking story as we record this, so we're going to have to keep an eye on it. But let me know in the comments what you think about this and the rest of this month's news, or any other stories we may have missed. I'm Ben Watts, you're watching Mentor Now. Have an amazing week, and I'll see you next time.